Hello, my name is Tim Stark. I am the curator of the Harold J. Miossi Gallery, and I'm joined here today with Alexis Arnold, one of our artists in Certain Matter. We're so happy to be able to include her in the artist panel. She wasn't able to attend the in-person artist panel, so we are adding in this special interview with Alexis. Alexis Arnold is a multidisciplinary artist who works in the San Francisco Bay Area and produces amazing work that engages viewers on an optical level, often presenting works that change and adapt as a person views them and changes their perspective, all without electricity. It's pretty amazing. So Alexis, thanks for joining us here today. Behind me is Alexis's work in the show. These crystallized books are really remarkable. They flow, they open, they're almost caught in action by these crystals, and they're transformed from objects that we are familiar with, objects of use and things that we can open and investigate, and transformed into sculptural objects that are no longer books, but become this kind of thing that is other than. So Alexis, I would like to ask you a couple questions about your work and about your upcoming work, and just to kind of get your ideas on things.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me here.
So the first one I want to ask about is, this show is focused on material abstraction. And so I would love to get your input on your connection with your material within your work. And I know in some of your newer work, you're working with different materials, and how those materials specifically drive your work and your exploration process within your work.
Yes. So material is definitely a driving factor in kind of, I would say, every series that I work with. I do have lots of different, what at first feel like disparate series, but then once I see then the results of them, I can see all the different connections. And one of those connections is definitely material and just the transformation of material, and dealing also with people's expectations of material and how you can use an expectation of a specific material and then challenge that or transform it as well to help with perception of that material by viewers. So a lot of my material, sometimes I find it by accident. I actually ended up using the crystallized books, kind of thinking about books as being a good malleable object with a lot of kind of meaning rooted and embedded in them themselves. And then happened to find 8 boxes of books on the side of the road the following day. So sometimes material finds you, and then other times I do spend a fair amount of my practice is researching new materials, ordering things, testing them out, lots of little trial and error with material, just holding things up in my studio and seeing what visual effects I can create with different materials.
With the books, is there also an aspect of this kind of recycling, it's almost like you're turning these into gems a little bit, like they become special once again.
Yes, and then that was initially part of the series where I was only using found books, and I have transitioned away from that just to want to have a little more control over the shape and the books not falling apart. A lot of older books come with must and other stuff embedded in them that makes the crystallization process a little more challenging. But that was definitely initially one of the impetuses behind it.
Yeah. I know that in some of your newer work that you're working with, you've engaged pretty heavily with paper and with making paper. How does that process, which is also very involved with water and chemistry and all sorts of other aspects, relate kind of to the books? And
yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about how water is kind of ends up being a material in my work. It's not there in the end, but it's involved in the process, of so many different pieces that I'm working on. Sorry for my dog. But so yeah, thinking of water as a material was an interesting thing to think about. And yeah, I think so many artists use water, whether you're a painter or not, but you don't think about it as including it in your list of material in the end. But yeah, so the paper also did kind of start from wanting to use recycled mail, junk mail, things like that. Of course, the more I went down the path of working with making paper pulp, I realized that that's not the best paper to use. So I have also transitioned away to using purchased material for that, but it does still feel like a pretty environmentally, benign practice compared to a lot of other art materials. So that was, one reason for switching towards paper. Also, just wanting to use, kind of something. I think paper is relatable and incredibly transformable as well, and does have a lot of kind of history and meaning attached to it too.
Yeah, so there's with this work and with that newer work, there's this idea of starting with an object or with a material that carries a weight with it already. And then there's a process within your work that I see where you're actively either trying to transform that piece while hanging on to some of that material weight as within the books here, or almost completely transform and take and just take that material and make it into something completely different and new. Say with the paper making that you're doing now. And I just wonder about when that choice happens, say with the books, they're obviously still books and they still relate as books, even though they're not functional as books anymore. They become books as sculpture as opposed to books as a reading object. How does that drive your process of thinking about it? Is it something that when you started interacting with books, did you make a decision that you didn't want to deconstruct them to the point of them not being objects anymore?
Yeah, I think books already are those almost a sculpture on a shelf. A bookshelf contains books that you sometimes go back to, but a lot of the times, it's just an object that what the story or other information contained in it, and you don't actually need to interact with it anymore to have that knowledge inside you. You read a book as a kid, and often at least the idea basics of that story stay with you the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of how that book represents the physical book represents everything that's contained within it and all those ideas. And so I think, yes, the story will stay there no matter what I've done to it. All of that personal meaning remains to whoever has now the sculpture. And a lot of the books I do use have a lot of those kind of significant this book meant a lot to me. I want to memorialize this book that has specific meaning to me, for collectors or even myself, in choosing titles like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And we've had several people in the gallery having that reaction to the books directly as well. So,
and that's why I just keep the title of the book,
yeah,
of the sculpture as the title of the crystallized book, because a lot of the time you can't tell what book it is anymore. So that helps people understand, and know what specific book that they were looking at and why maybe it was used.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's fascinating, and it definitely draws a direct connection that allows people to start to engage sculpturally with the objects more directly as well. So they come in with this personal connection, and then they start to see the books as these shapes and constructed objects, and then they start to really engage with the actual sculpture itself.
And I think people have memories connected to books aside from the story. You remember what was going on in your life when you read a book, where you were, those kind of context memories, I think, get triggered by just hearing a book title.
Oh, I think very much so. Yeah, definitely. I would like to ask about this larger kind of idea that is also encapsulated within the basis of the show, which is this idea of abstraction, of material-based abstraction specifically, but of abstraction as a whole. And I present it in the show as contemporary abstraction, which is this this grouping of artwork which we have yet to name or understand fully, and its connection with movement towards non-representational artwork, and this idea of creating artwork that is expressing something through the means of not of presenting shapes and forms, but without presenting direct representation from the world. How is that relationship and that engagement with representation or non-representation in your work, how does that kind of inform your work, and where is that within your practice?
It's something I've been thinking about more lately. I've been working on an exhibition with the theme of grids. So, kind of very ultimate abstraction. Looking into that, a lot of artists in turn of the century started working with grids in their art as a resistance to the expectation of representation in art, because that was what was being praised for hundreds of years in art as representation. So the grid was a really good method to explore abstraction. So it's been an interesting way for me to go down that hole myself of having something that's guiding you. Grid is very specific at the same time as being endless and full of possibility. So it's an interesting just a way to go about it. It's abstract, but I'm still calling it something. So in giving something a name, to me, that gives it representation as well. And I'd say the books kind of fall in that category where I'm not creating anything representational with them, but they are an existing object that represents the physical object of book, and then everything else we've been talking about that's represented in books as well. And then the one right behind you is a book on it's Highway 1 California book. So it's all about California. So that's obviously personally connected to me. I grew up in Los Angeles and now live in Oakland. And so having something that is all about the place I'm from and then being shown in San Luis Obispo as well, felt like another layer of connection and representation. You could see it as.
Well, I think that's really interesting. I think engaging with a grid, specifically now, is a really interesting kind of relationship to our current place we're at. I feel like the grids in the early 20th century, while they were abstract, they were also so ubiquitous within the culture that was kind of being put into grids at that point. People were analyzing work using grids, and people were living in grids now as opposed to not living in grids before. And it's really interesting looking back on those earlier abstractions, say from Mondrian or some of the other people working at the time, to see how they really were responding to something within the world, but maybe that was not necessarily something they could even consider at the time, as they were too close to it. And now we have two relationships that are happening within your work that I think is fascinating with that. So if we have grids on one hand, which is kind of talking about the organization of space by dividing space up into either equal or non-equal placements, and using lines to do so, or some object to do so. And that's an organizational structure. And I think the books are also some sort of an organizational structure that
Well,
have been,
crystal itself, the
is
definition
an
of a
organization.
crystal is a repeating structure as well.
Often a grid of some form, repeating over and over again. So for me, there's a relationship there that I think is very interesting, and starting from a point of like almost ultimate organization, and then allowing for this organic growth on top of it that then kind of bridges and breaks out, or uses a naturalist grid to come in and break down another organizational form into something that is completely different and changed. I think that's a really fascinating way to touch on it. For me, when I saw these works and included them within the show, it was the perfect connection between material and the nature of abstraction within the work, because they are so much related to the books and so much based in the material that the books are, and the crystals are, and that's all that's there. And then what happens, the magic and the art that happens within them is what happens when they interact with each other. And that's where your magic happens for me too, is that the crystals start to grow, and the books start to change and get held in place and get warped and manipulated in a way that is fascinating, because you've set up all of the processes to make this happen, and then allow organic growth to kind of pile on top. And I find that to be fascinating. That was one of the biggest things that kind of drew me to this work.
That's something I've been working, kind of trying to apply to other art. I have a tendency to, I think, over refine things sometimes, and the books don't allow that. It's a nice, series, and that you have to let them do what they want to do, or they're going to fight against you. And so I've been kind of trying to take a little bit of that looser approach to working with the grid, which is usually really rigid. And also, like, optical art is usually super clean and refined. So I'm trying to kind of force myself to be a little looser and see, how much of that, op art refinement you can still achieve the effect of without having it be super, super clean, everything perfect about it.
Well, Alexis, it was great to have you, and to have you be able to talk about your work now. Your next show is opening in Michigan.
October. No, it's a place called Minnesota Street Project.
Minnesota.
It's in San Francisco, actually.
Oh, it's in San Francisco. Okay.
Yeah, it's on Minnesota Street is why.
Oh, okay, I got it. Sorry.
So it's
opening
October 1st at San Francisco Arts Ed Gallery, San Francisco Arts Ed Project Gallery at Minnesota Street Project.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to that as well. And I thank you so much for joining us and to be able to be here. It's so wonderful to have you and to have your work included in the show.
I'm really excited to be a part of it.
Oh, that's excellent. The Certain Matter exhibition runs until October 14th. It's open Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. every week. We're also open by appointment if you'd like to join us. I'd like to thank the Harold J. Miossi Trust for making this possible, along with Cuesta College. Thank you, everybody. We're looking forward to more student interviews in the future. Thanks.